There are so many theories surrounding Avengers Endgame out there right now that it can be hard to keep track of them all. One popular idea is that Tony Stark will end up forging his own version of the Infinity Gauntlet in order to defeat Thanos. This makes sense, but it's also possible he's had a bit of help getting started on his journey, and that the clues about it were there in Infinity War all along. One of the many reasons we love Marvel characters so much is because they're flawed. When superhero comic books first became a thing, all of the heroes were the epitome of virtuous, both in the lives of their alter egos and when they're fighting crime. But Marvel pulled ahead of the pack by creating characters who have as many flaws as they do skills, and perhaps no character exemplifies this better than Tony Stark. During the Cold War, everyone lived in fear of weapons and war, so Stan Lee decided to give himself a challenge. He wanted to create a character who had made his fortune selling weapons to the military and see if he could get audiences to like him, and surprisingly enough, they did. When Marvel Studios were ready to start making superhero movies, they started out with Iron Man, which was a massive hit and kicked off what we know today as the MCU. But now let's take a look at the MCU version of Tony specifically and the surprising similarities he shares with Thanos. After all, Marvel Studios has been teasing us about the appearance of Thanos in the MCU ever since we spotted the fake Infinity Gauntlet in Odin's vault in the movie Thor. Yet following the Avengers, we learned Thanos has been the one to give the Tesseract to Loki, which kicked off the events of the movie. But does Tony know this? After all, Thanos is really Tony's biggest fear, and that's far from a secret. In Age of Ultron, Tony talks about being terrified after the Battle of New York and living in fear of alien creatures attacking Earth, while he's powerless to stop them. It's the reason he creates Ultron in the first place and the source of his panic attacks during Iron Man 3. Considering how well his Ultron project turned out, plus the fact that he sided against Captain America in Civil War, it's not hard to see that Tony had become something of a villain himself. But in a way, as bad as the events of Infinity War were, they kind of vindicated Tony because everything he'd been talking about for years had finally come true, and it was every bit as bad as he predicted. While Tony was worrying about a terrifying creature destroying life on Earth, it turns out that Thanos was worried about an Earthling managing to stop him from destroying life on Earth. It's an interesting parallel and one that wasn't lost on either Tony or Thanos. According to co-writer Christopher Marcus, Thanos is a futurist as much as Tony Stark. Joe Russo has clarified that Thanos has been aware of Tony ever since the Battle of New York. While we all knew what Tony took away from that fight, Thanos learned something as well, that there's a human who has the power to stop him. Thanos may not have feared Tony in the same way Tony fears him, but he most certainly saw him as an adversary by the end of the Avengers. These two definitely have some sort of connection, and if you think about it, they're currently tied. Tony ruined Thanos' plans during the Avengers, and Thanos triumphant during Infinity War. Sure, Tony isn't the only hero out there trying to stop Thanos, but these two characters have undeniably parallel stories, and because of this, it seems likely Tony will play a major role in defeating Thanos. There are plenty of characters who want to undo the decimation and defeat Thanos, but for Tony, it's personal. It's the clash of the technology titan versus the mad titan as we head into Endgame, and it's the tragic death of Peter Parker during Infinity War that just adds fuel to the fire. Another reason to think Tony will have a substantial impact during Endgame was brought to our attention by Redditor Fishgray, who paid close attention to how Doctor Strange was acting during Infinity War. We all know that Doctor Strange straight up told Tony he would let both him and Peter die if it meant saving the Time Stone. Doctor Strange may be kind of a jerk, but at least he's a straight shooter and we expect that. After using the Time Stone to take a look at 14 million plus possible futures, he made the call to hand over the Time Stone and save Tony. Strange claimed he had found a single future in which they triumphed over Thanos before declaring they were now in the Endgame. Hey, that's the name of the next Avengers movie. I see what they did. So it's pretty clear that Strange believes Tony needs to stay alive in order to unlock the one good ending. But what exactly did Doctor Strange see on his journey with the Time Stone? And perhaps more importantly, what did he do during this time? Could he use the Time Stone to tie into what was frankly the single most puzzling moment of the entire movie? Now let's talk about Loki for a moment. Whether you love him or hate him, he's a pretty clever guy, and during Thor Ragnarok, we saw him being downright heroic by showing up to help Thor defeat Hela. Yes, he squirreled away the space stone out of Odin's vault, but in fairness, he did this while he was risking his life. He also still calls himself Loki, Odin's son, despite knowing he's adopted, and more importantly, the fact that Odin has been pretty terrible to him the whole time he's been in the MCU. Seriously, he straight up told Loki he would gladly kill him if it wouldn't upset his mother so much. Well, it looks like Thanos isn't the only bad parent in the MCU after all. Anyway, it's clear that not only does Loki care for Thor and Odin, but he cared for Asgard as well. He has to be pretty devastated by the end of Ragnarok. And then we have the opening of Infinity War, in which we see Thanos board the Asgardian ship looking for the Space Stone. Loki saves Thor by handing it over to Thanos, but his behavior after that is pretty strange. He knows how powerful Thanos is, since he's worked with him before, so there's no way Loki could have thought he was going to kill him by stabbing him with a little knife. Loki's plans may not be the best, but we expect better of him. And then there's this strange dialogue while talking to Thanos. When he says Odin's son, he turns to look right at Thor in a meaningful way before turning back to Thanos. Then he pledges his undying fidelity before promptly dying. The whole scene just seemed odd, and Loki was acting strange even for him. This caused some fans to question if Loki was really dead, because surely he wasn't going to die just like that. But it's also possible that Loki knew he was going to die. That's why he didn't seem to fight especially hard or even competently against Thanos. It would also explain why he tried to assure Thor he still viewed him as family despite what he was saying to Thanos. But how could Loki have known about what was going to happen? After all, if he had, wouldn't he just tried to avoid it instead of throwing his life away at the hands of Thanos? It's possible that during his trip through time, Doctor Strange had a sit-down with his fellow sorcerer on this timeline. We saw our heroes do absolutely everything possible to stop Thanos from collecting the Infinity Stones, and they still couldn't do it. It's possible that Doctor Strange recognized this was inevitable, and all he could do was manipulate when Thanos would get the Space Stone. It could even be that the reason Loki showed up during Ragnarok wasn't solely to help out, but because Strange needed Thanos to get the stone at that particular time, and Loki was helping him out. Think about it. When you're dealing with Doctor Strange and the Time Stone, before you ask why, you really have to ask yourself when. Now let's take a look at when Doctor Strange gave Thanos the Time Stone. Thanos was pretty sure Strange was going to trick him, and that's a fair concern. But while Strange appeared to just hand the Time Stone over, it was glowing in a way it usually does if someone is using it. Strange can't use the power of the Time Stone to send it somewhere else, but he could have set it to go to another time. When we watch Thanos use the Infinity Gauntlet, it's clear that the Mad Titan injured himself somehow, and the gauntlet itself was damaged, if not destroyed completely. At first we thought this was due to the power of the Infinity Stones, but could it be that the time paradox, or simply the power of the Time Stone returning from when Doctor Strange handed it to Thanos? Then there's the idea of the multiverse and alternate timelines, which is something that has only recently been introduced to the MCU. This is something which is a huge part of the Marvel comic book universe, and we know it was only a matter of time before this convenient plot device made it to the big screen as well. One popular Endgame theory is that our heroes will somehow travel back in time and revisit notable incidents in the MCU in order to retrieve the various Infinity Stones before Thanos has a chance to get them. This is a theory that makes sense. We've had time travel introduced since Doctor Strange, and between the Time Stone and the time vortexes of the quantum realm, we have plausible explanations as how our heroes will be able to make their journey. But let's not forget that our heroes aren't limited to traveling to their own timeline, and it's possible to bring useful objects or even people from one universe to another. If Doctor Strange had gone to different futures and managed to obtain an Infinity Stone or two from them, then it's also possible he swapped out the Time Stone or the Space Stone, if not both, before Thanos got his hands on them during Infinity War. We know it's all a bit confusing, but if Doctor Strange had swapped out at least one Infinity Stone with one from another timeline, the decimation still would have happened, but it would give our heroes a head start on the beginning of Endgame, because they'd already have a working Infinity Stone in their possession, and the Space and Time Stone would be incredibly useful on a mission where you had to travel across space, time, and the entire universe. If Tony ended up with at least one of these stones on Titan, it could explain how he finally gets back to Earth. During the trailer for Endgame, we saw him living out one of his worst nightmares since he's been left adrift in the depths of space, running out of food and oxygen on the Milano. Many fans have been wondering who's going to show up to rescue Tony Stark, and there are a lot of possibilities. Could it be Nebula, Captain Marvel, Korg, and Meek? But maybe Doctor Strange found a way to give Tony the means to rescue himself. If you examine the history of Tony and Thanos across the years they've spent in the MCU, it's clear that the battle between them has been built up for quite some time, and making an Infinity Gauntlet is one likely reason why Tony would have to survive through the events of Endgame. Tony's one of the most brilliant minds in the MCU and has no shortage of resources, especially because Shuri is gone, or at least seems to be. He's the obvious choice for crafting such an item. Sure, Tony could mix things up and make an Infinity Boot or a literal Infinity Scarf, but a gauntlet seems much more likely. One of the difficulties of killing off half your cast is it makes things difficult in terms of people pulling their weight in the final battle. But it's possible that characters like Doctor Strange and maybe even Loki managed to help out without us even realizing it. Tony creating weapons when he's all alone and seemingly out of options was pretty much what happened during Iron Man. So it'd be kind of poetic to see it happening again during Endgame. But if Tony does manage to create a new Infinity Gauntlet, the only question would be, who's going to wield it? At this point, our heroes don't have a lot of options. A heavy hitter like the Hulk seems like an obvious choice, but would Tony really let a fellow Avenger take on such a risk? Or would he insist on doing it himself? The answer to this question could mean the difference between Tony surviving to fight another day in the MCU, or us saying goodbye to an old friend in Endgame. Get your tissues! Now that you've heard about this possible Avengers Endgame theory, what do you think's gonna happen? Will Tony Stark create a new Infinity Gauntlet, or will our heroes have to defeat Thanos another way? Let us know in the comments section below, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more MCU content. Thanks for watching.